In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make the heel flap and gusset heel. As you can see, I've knitted a cuff and a leg, and I'm ready to put in a heel. This time I'm not going to choose the boomerang heel, but I'm going to do the traditional heel flap and gusset heel, which is also worked on half of the stitches that are on your needles. So if you're knitting with 60 stitches in total, you'll do the heel over 30 stitches. And the first row is very, very simple. It says so in the pattern, knit all stitches. So you don't have to do anything in particular. While I'm doing that, I'll tell you why there's a big green thread in the middle of my knitting. I've put in a lifeline. That's a very good thing to do if you're not sure if the heel that you're going to knit is going to work, or if you're not sure if a fair isle pattern is going to work, and you don't want to rip out the entire knitting that you did. So you just take a piece of cotton, as I did, or some yarn that doesn't split, and you weave it through all the stitches with a very blunt needle. And then if you make a mistake and you have to rip a part out, then that thread is going to hold the stitches so that you can put your needle back in. And while I told you that, I'm coming up to the end of the needle. So after this, I'll turn my work. We're not working in the round for the heel, but we're working back and forth. This was a setup row, and now we're going to do 2 rows that we have to repeat a lot of times. The first stitch will always be a knit stitch, so you knit the first stitch. You purl across until there's 1 stitch left. Three more stitches on the needle. I'm going to purl 2 of them, and with 1 stitch left on the needle, I'm going to slip it to the other needle with the yarn in front. In this case, the yarn was in front because I was purling, but on the next row, we're going to do the same thing at the end of the row, and we have to put the yarn in front to slip the stitch. The second row, the first stitch is always a knit stitch. The second stitch will be taken off the needle as if to purl. You knit 1 and you slip 1 purlwise. You knit 1, you slip 1 purlwise. And just as the previous row, at the end of the row, put the yarn in front, so not in the back, but in the front, and you slip the stitch purlwise. You turn your work. We can also do this knitting the throwing style. So I knit the first stitch, I bring the yarn to the front, and I purl across until there's 1 stitch left. Now every stitch gets a purl, so we're not slipping any stitches on the wrong side. This is the last stitch that I purl. The yarn is in front, and I slip the last stitch to the other needle. I turn my work. Now we're going to do the second row again. So we knit the first stitch, and we slip 1 stitch as if to purl. Knit 1, slip, knit 1, slip, knit 1, all the way to the other side. The last stitch will be slipped with the yarn in front. Slip 1, knit 1, bring the yarn to the front and slip the last stitch. You're going to repeat rows 1 and 2 until you have as many rows as there are stitches on your needle. I've got 30 stitches on my needle, so I have to repeat this until I have 30 rows, and this will be a flat piece of knitting that we're going to turn into a heel later. So I'll see you again when I've got 30 rows. I'm almost finished with the heel flap. You can see that I've almost made 30 rows. I still have to do one last knit row, so at the right side of the sock, because you have to finish with a right side row, so you can continue the turning of the heel on the wrong side. You can start the turning of the heel on the wrong side. Now, it's not very difficult to see when you have to stop this first part of the heel, because you can obviously see all the slipped stitches here, and it's very easy to count them. Also, because we always slip the last stitch with the yarn in front and then knit it at the beginning of the next round, you get these very visible side stitches. There's a lot of them. There should be 15 on each side, so if you count them and you end up with 15 on one side and 14 on the other side, so you still have to knit one stitch, this will be number 15. Then you knit across to the other side, you slip the last stitch with the yarn in front, and then we're ready to turn the heel. So we'll do that. Knit the first one and slip, knit and slip, knit and slip, knit one, I slip the last one with the yarn in front, and that finishes the last right side row of the heel flap. Now I'm turning my work. We're going to work the turning of the heel on this side, on the wrong side row. We still have 30 stitches on the needles, so that should be easy to count, easy to see if you still have as many stitches as you started with. We're going to slip the first stitch as if to purl, but we're going to keep the yarn in the back of the work, so like this. Now we're going to purl until we're at the half of the stitches. These are 30 stitches. Half of that is 15. And then I knit 2 stitches, I purl 2 stitches together. And then we purl 1 additional stitch. So this is 1. The first one is slipped. Then I purl 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. The next 2 stitches will be purled together, so I act as if they are both 1 stitch, and then I purl 1 additional stitch. Turn your work. And maybe you're concerned that turning your work will leave a very big gap here. Well, that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to make a big gap so that we'll see where we have to make our next purl 2 together in the next round. We're going to slip the first stitch as if to purl. The yarn is still in the back. That's the first thing we do. We knit 1. Then we slip knit. That means I insert as if to knit. I just slip the yarn. I slip a second stitch as if to knit. I put the left needle through both loops and I knit those 2 together through the back loop. Then I knit 1 more stitch. and I turn my work. Now the repeating part begins. So slip one stitch with the yarn end back. I purl. And I'm going to purl up until one stitch before the large gap. You can see here there's a very large gap between these two stitches. That means that these two stitches have to be purled together. Purl them together. And I purl one additional stitch. Turn my work. Slip one stitch. I'm going to knit. I'm on the right side, so I knit up until one stitch before the large gap. That was this one. I don't knit those two together, I slip, slip, knit. So slip one, slip the second one, knit them together through the back loop, and one additional stitch. I turn my work, and I continue doing this until there's no more stitches left. I purl. Until I see a gap appearing. There it is. Large gap. You purl those two stitches together. Purl one additional stitch, don't forget that. Then turn your work. I slip one stitch, I knit to the other side until I get to the large gap. Here it is. So I slip, slip, knit those two together. One additional stitch, turn my work. Slip a stitch, I purl across. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Here's the gap, so I purl those two together. Purl one additional stitch and turn the work. I think you get the gist of it, so I'll see you when I finish turning the heel. Okay, the last row of the turning of the heel should be a right side row on which you slip the first stitch, you knit until the end, and at the end you SSK or slip slip knit one last time, and there won't be any additional stitches to knit. So we'll do that. As you can see, you've made a little heel shape here at the back. And then we do a slip, slip, knit for the last stitches. There. Now you've got a heel flap. You've turned the heel. Now we are going to pick up stitches along the side of the flap that we knit before. Picking up stitches is rather easy. Just make sure that you always find two legs of a stitch, wrap the yarn around and pick it up. We do that for 15 stitches on this side. Three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And then to avoid a large gap between the last stitch you picked up and the first stitch that's on your other needle, you'll have to pick up 2 additional stitches somewhere in between. Just make sure you grab 2 strands of yarn. That's one. And also make sure you don't grab your lifeline. And that's the second additional stitch. Once you did that, grab your third needle and just knit all the stitches that are on this needle. These are really tight because of the lifeline that's in there. I'll see you at the end of this line, at the end of this needle. Just knit across all those stitches. We're at the end of the top needle. Now we have to pick up 2 stitches at this side before we start picking up the side stitches. So again, trying to avoid the lifeline, I pick up 2 stitches here and then 15 side stitches along the side of the flap. And always making sure I grab both strands of each stitch. 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and I love it when a plan comes together. 15 is the last stitch I pick up, and I just continue under the turning of the heel. And this gets easier every time you decrease a stitch, because from now on, every time we get at the end of this large number of stitches, we knit 2 stitches together. So I'm now coming up the side of the heel flap. And when I come to the top of the heel flap, just before I go over to the other needle, I knit the last 2 stitches together, which makes for a decrease. So there are 2 stitches left on this needle. I decrease by knitting them together. Then I knit across the top needle. Once I'm at the end of the top needle, I switch back to the needle that has the most stitches, and I decrease on that side by SSKing. So I slip knit 1 time here at the beginning of this needle. So I slip one stitch as if to knit, slip another stitch as if to knit, enter the needle into both and knit them together through the back loop. And I continue knitting along the side of the heel flap. All those stitches. When I come up the other side of the heel flap, I knit 2 stitches together. So here on this side, and on the other side, I always slip, slip, knit. And I continue doing that until I have 30 stitches on my needle again. No need to count it now. Those are way more than 30 stitches. If you're done doing that, just knit in the round without decreasing until you have the required foot length, and then you're ready to knit a toe. I hope this was helpful. Have a lot of fun. I'll see you next time.